The point is that this is kind of one of those things where you have a set of rules here for that, right? You had the actor that was involved that granted his permission to the people that own the character that he was the voice for. They had an agreement with the game maker, an investment in the game maker, and boom. The problem with Midjourney is that this is just like an open architecture AI, much like Grok and kind of everything else, where it just goes out into Google. Renegade Online. Disney and Universal are joining forces to sue Midjourney over artificial intelligence images of Darth Vader, Elsa, minions, and more. And a lot of this is limited to the characters themselves, especially if they're animated characters. Minions, Rise, the little animated characters there. But we'll kind of walk through this because there are some interesting pieces to this. Basically, what's happening is you have this company, Midjourney, who's been advertising their artificial intelligence software, selling it, and in some cases using some of these AI-generated images of these copyrighted assets and characters that belong to Disney and Comcast, Universal. And so now these two companies they've joined forces together in one lawsuit, which I guess when you think of this, normally you think of like a class action, but when you actually have two plaintiffs here that have joined together, it doesn't really make it a class, does it, Ron? It's just...
No.
So this is just for efficiency, basically, if you're going to sue somebody?
They have essentially the same claims, and they're saying they're doing this to us and they're doing this to them. In fact, in intellectual property, it's not uncommon. For example, when I did a lot of counterfeiting work, sometimes we would identify a website that was selling counterfeits of Rolex and Louis Vuitton, and what we would do actually is sometimes pitch the clients on doing a lawsuit was saying these guys are selling knockoffs of your stuff. We're trying to get together a bunch of plaintiffs, and this way, instead of everyone spending $100,000, everyone's spending $20,000.
Yeah.
Why so little? Because those cases usually ended up being defaults. But the point is, yeah, there's no reason if it's the same offense and it's the same technology and everything's the same, Disney and Universal are both being harmed the same way.
Yeah, and that's what it seems like. So we'll get into the particulars here that was published today on that Park Place, and there's some other articles out there from THR, from Variety, from Deadline. The war over AI and intellectual property just hit a hyperspace as Disney and Comcast Universal bring the hammer down on AI company Midjourney. In a dramatic escalation, the entertainment industry's pushback against generative AI, Disney and Comcast have filed a joint copyright lawsuit against the popular image generator. And I believe they had sent, back in, I think November it was, Jonas told me they had sent some cease and desists. They had kind of, hey, stop doing this, stop doing that. I guess Midjourney said, hey, try me, asshole. And now this is where we are. They decided to go ahead with the suit.
So I will tell you something about that. So my understanding is that Midjourney is not necessarily the biggest problem that these guys have. I've represented defendants as well as plaintiffs in these situations, and there are two considerations. One is sometimes plaintiffs send out, they have a campaign. So, okay, we got to get on top of this, or at least look like we're not acceding to it. So it's time to send out a bunch of cease and desist letters. And you then sometimes make an educated guess how many of us are going to get sued? Are they going to sue all of us? Are they going to sue one of us? Who's going to make some example out of us? So they may have figured maybe we'll get away with this one. Maybe we won't be the guys. But there's also a problem, which is that sometimes a defendant who was accused of infringement will say, I don't really have a problem in theory settling with Disney or settling with Universal. But if I settle with Disney and Universal, or even just one of them, their lawyers are going to now hit up all the other studios and all the other IP owners and say, that settlement we got against Midjourney, We can get that for you too. So
Right.
it makes sense sometimes to settle out one company, but often what all you're doing is making an open invitation to, and here's their problem. This is their business.
Yeah.
This is their business.
Right, exactly. And the business of making the software that can do this, that gathers data from an open library, just like Grok does. And this is kind of the thing, right? This is something that Jonas and I were hypothesizing about earlier. Midjourney is relatively very small company. A tiny fraction of a fraction compared to some of these bigger players out there. And it may be easier to muscle them, and if they can get the kind of ruling that they would hope for, it might make it a lot easier to go after the Groks and everybody else. Because right now, I can go into Grok and I can say, create an image of the minions, hitting Joe Biden on the head with a wiffle bat, something like this. And it'll take it and make it look just like the minions as if Universal and Illumination Studios made it and all this kind of stuff. Now, in this lawsuit, there's apparently they're not, it's the characters, right? Vader has a mask on, but they're not going after images that Midjourney create for money, basically, right? People pay for the software, they pay for the subscription, and they're generating images with copyrighted material. They're not going after like Luke Skywalker holding a lightsaber, because we presume that, well, that would be up to Mark Hamill to go after them for his likeness, as opposed to an original created character. And to what we said was, I think I made the comment of like Chris Pratt as Star-Lord. So somebody generates an image of Chris Pratt as Star-Lord from Guardians of the Galaxy. It's not part of this suit. Everything listed in there seemed to be like an animated character. But if they made Star-Lord from the Disney Marvel comic book, that would be included in this suit, because it's not Chris Pratt as Star-Lord. So it's kind of interesting how they set this up. I look at this and I think there's probably something to this. There's probably something here. It is their business model, obviously, for Midjourney to make this product that can do this, but these products also just kind of go out openly on the web and do X, Y, and Z. Now, some other companies out there have been more cautious. Like, I can tell you from personal experience, Ron, when Adobe Firefly first came out, and I think that's been around for at least a year, maybe longer now, but that's their generative AI product from Adobe. I can't go in there and tell Adobe Firefly to generate an AI image of, say, like an actual person that will really look like that actual person when it renders. Or say like, hey, make a picture of, like I've done it on Grok. Make a picture of Mickey Mouse crying at the feet of Donald Trump in a courtroom. It was like we made that image and we used it as a thumbnail for a show. I can't do that in Firefly, because it'll tell you it's, there's copyrighted, personalities like Mickey Mouse or whatnot in there. So some of the bigger ones have done this, some have not. What happens, like I said here, if Disney gets, let's say they don't settle, I don't know, maybe they fight it out. Now, if they settle it, what's the difference between them settling it versus going to court and getting a court victory that says Disney and Universal, you win, okay, on your claims? There's a precedent that gets set there, does it not, that they could then proceed on to bigger fish like X and Grok?
That is true. That is true. A settlement at the district court level is not necessarily all that controlling, but it's exactly, and John G. pointed out in the comments that they're obviously targeting a smaller company so that they'll be able to get a quick and dirty victory.
Right. That was our thought.
They might not accept. Yeah, they might not accept a settlement. There's a lot of moving parts here, because, as you point out, they were looking for trouble by using the characters, by just really using very poorly disguised or hardly disguised at all, from the pictures I see in the complaint, versions of those characters. They were asking for trouble. What I think I'll tell you, when I was a teenager, I worked in a Carvel ice cream store. And among the skills I developed was making ice cream cakes with pictures on them with a little projector. And people very frequently wanted Mickey Mouse on the ice cream cake. And it was understood we could never do Disney because I think they had actually been sued by Disney.
I remember that. Yeah.
And
I've had similar experiences.
It is, I understand from the point of view of trademark infringement, trademark maintenance, why companies have to do this. But I think it really sucks. People should be able to make trivial use of characters. And YouTube is the worst example of this. You can't use a snatch of music from something where it's obviously it's not an infringing use. You're using it.
Yeah, like a fair
it's a
use
problem.
Kind of thing.
But one of the really interesting things about this lawsuit is they're going on this not only on the fact that the software will deliver an infringing version of the character, but also that they're training the large language models or the large image models. I'm not sure what the terminology is on the Disney and Universal IP. Mm-hmm. And I've got a much bigger problem with this idea that, and this is something that that came up in the writer's strike in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. This idea of training AI on our proprietary material. Mm-hmm. I think that's a much harder argument to win. Yeah, and it's interesting. It's interesting for the studios to take that approach in this lawsuit. Mm-hmm. It could come back to bite them in the ass when they start using AI trained on people, on materials that artists and writers have produced for them.
It could, the interesting part about that, the last part that you said, is that this is kind of one of the things that has been a real bone of contention, a sticking point in the recent Hollywood strikes from like a year or two ago now, when you had SAG-AFTRA, the Actors Guild, and you had the WGA, the Writers Guild, that spent almost the entirety of between the two of them, almost the entire year of 2023 was shot, right? Because they were on strike. And one of the things that they were hammering in the negotiations was the issue of artificial intelligence in there and the use of it to either replace writers, or if there has to be the issue was there was no rules in place. How are we going to handle this? We need something clear cut to try to handle the use of it. So, one of the things recently, and I don't know if you saw this. Let me see if I have. Ron, did you see us discussing the story about, how Epic Games, when Disney did the whole $1.5 billion partnership with Epic Games, the guys who make Fortnite? Well, they just had a big thing where they put Darth Vader in Fortnite as an artificial intelligence character. That he's in there, he can actually, like traditionally in Fortnite, you might run around a map and there might be a non-playable character that you can hire to go fight with you so you can win the match and help you out, kill other players in there. Well, this NPC, this hireable player for the last season, the last 30 days, was Darth Vader. And he had artificial intelligence built into him to where he could react to you and respond to questions you asked him during the live chat while you're playing. I don't know if you saw any of this.
No, I didn't.
All right, check this out. So this is some of the AI. Watch this.
I hate the new sequel movies. I don't like them.
The sequels, eh? A narrative wasteland, devoid of compelling vision or memorable characters. They are pale imitations, Snake. Do you find such mediocrity palatable?
So not only did they...
That's so cool.
Now, this is the thing. So James Earl Jones, before he died, and everything was set up with him and his estate to where he granted Disney Lucasfilm the rights to his voice to AI it so they could continue to make Darth Vader. And in this case, they put him in the Fortnite games. Now, what's funny is if you didn't catch what he said, the guy said, "I hate the Disney sequel trilogies." And Vader, in James Earl Jones's voice, trashes the Disney sequel trilogies. And it's a Disney product, trashing other Disney. So you would not believe what they had. I can't play half the stuff that they had Vader do, but there are scores of videos on YouTube right now. It's James Earl Jones singing Snoop Dogg songs full of F words, N words, and everything else in Fortnite. But
the point is, this was a deal made between Disney and Fortnite, right?
Yeah, Disney, Fortnite, and James Earl Jones. So this was all.
But they didn't program it say bad things and to not say 4-letter words.
Somebody did not have the foresight to do that. Yeah, so it was very quickly the Fortnite community of, I mean, tens of millions of players around the world figured out very quickly how to get this AI to do some really funny stuff. And it was, but the point is that this is kind of one of those things where you have a set of rules here for that, right? You had the actor that was involved that granted his permission to the people that own the character that he was the voice for. They had an agreement with the game maker, an investment in the game maker, and boom. The problem with Midjourney is that this is just like an open architecture AI, much like Grok and kind of everything else, where it just goes out into Google and DuckDuckGo or Microsoft Bing. I'm just kidding. Nobody uses that shit. It's like, and it just says, oh, you're looking for a picture of Donald Trump doing something or Joe Biden doing something or Maxine Waters with her face as an actual prune. It's very close to it. It will do it. I mean,
it's fascinating. I mean, it seems like they should be able to program around that to a large extent. People will then try to hack it.
Yep.
But let's face it, you can make a deal with, with an established game studio, but the technology is out there and it's in use. And to some extent, this is a little bit like when the studios all sued Betamax, sued Sony over the Betamax.
Yep.
And an extremely important case in the history of intellectual property law, the court said Betamax isn't infringing anything. They made a tool.
That's interesting.
Where you end up making the tool, how far up the curve the tool goes toward the infringement is always going to be an interesting question. But that was a game changer, right?
Yeah.
That was the beginning of the era that we live in now, where unlike when I grew up, you had to wait for something to come on TV and watch it whenever the hell the networks and the studios decided that you would get to watch it. And that was the beginning of time shifting.
Yeah.
And, eventually we live in a world of streaming. Well, this technology is going to be ultimately uncontrollable. Someone in the chat said, someone in China is going to do it, and they're not going to give a shit about what the Ninth Circuit says, and that is true. And I'm okay with that because I don't believe that there's going to be a failure of incentive.
No, Midjourney is not based in China. As far to my knowledge, this is
even though China is Middle Earth, you might very well have thought that, but
because if memory serves, the Betamax thing that you just mentioned, that was when wasn't the issue at hand that you could get a Betamax machine, you could pop a tape in and record something that was on TV, and then because you were
I thought everybody knew that.
Right.
No.
That's what I thought.
And VHS were the two competing home video recording formats.
The last time that Sony ever lost a format war was Betamax.
Well, and interestingly, Sony would subsequently become a studio.
Yeah,
they said it was not standing in the feet of being a studio. It was standing in the feet of being of being the technology company, which it hardly is anymore.
Well, there's still a lot of technology too. I mean, there's still a big side of it, but that's still.
It is not. It's not a pioneer the way it was. I mean, if it weren't for gaming, in fact, I don't know how much Sony would be. I mean, Sony used to be the go-to company for not for high end. You're an audiophile in addition to being a photographer, right? Yep. So you know what I'm talking about. You don't look to Sony for that.
No.
But in terms of portable, that they really were they were dominant, in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, no, they absolutely were, and they still have a good place out there. But I mean, they have a lot of commercial, industrial lines, and I think other stuff they make beyond that. Because I mean, even a lot of those companies out there that would make electronics, they'd have a whole other side of things where they would make digital imaging products for medical devices and industrial uses and all kind of stuff. It's been a while since I looked at the diversity of Sony in terms of their corporate structure and their different lines. But yeah, gaming, movies, and film studios, especially after buying up Columbia TriStar and all kind of other things. But I mean, to this end, though, with this lawsuit, it's interesting, right? Because I could make a really easy argument for Disney and Comcast absolutely have, I think, a claim here, in my layperson's opinion. I could probably also see from the other side where if you're Midjourney, like I said, that was a really interesting kind of comparison, saying that it's like Sony and the Betamax lawsuit because, but at the same time,
I think they went further up that curve of completion. They deliver you a fixed product, and look, you have the right to control your characters.
But and that may be, that's what's going to eventually have to come out of this. You're going to have, and I hate to say this because I hate saying that we need more laws. I hate that, but there is going to need to be some kind of fine line created between, and this is the problem, like you said, fair use versus, to me, it's if I'm making a little thumbnail to put on a YouTube video or something like this, or to show a funny image on the screen, whatever. I'm not trying to generate an artificial intelligence image and then say, this is my really cool image of the minions meet this character in Darth Vader, and then go online, print it out, right, and then sell it for $1,000 a pop as a poster or something like this. And speaking of fair use, like I said, YouTube is very picky. Depends on the studio. Before you got here, we were talking about the box office tracking for Superman. I would love to play the trailer for Superman, stop it every 2 or 3 seconds, and talk about what's in there. You know why I can't do it? Because Warner Brothers is the worst when it comes to YouTube. If you
it's ridiculous, and it's utterly ridiculous. There could be no more fair use than exactly what you just described.
Exactly.
But it's statutorily defined as reporting and commentary being an exception. Yeah. YouTube is in its own insane world, and they have done so much to distort the creative process and the law of copyright and expectations. And and you just made a really good point. We hate to find ourselves saying we need more laws, but the fact is, Congress has for so long ceased to be a deliberative lawmaking institution. It's just a political mudslinging organization now. If they could ever get their heads out of their own rectums and talk about the kinds of things they talked about not all that long ago, which was, let's talk about policies. These are not necessarily even partisan issues. The copyright statute there have been so few changes in copyright law since the digital revolution began. There have been a couple of things along the line, mostly things that Hollywood wanted.
Right. The people that have the lobbyists to go in there and force the issue with a lot of money. Right?
And judges have been making policy in this area, and that's not really what they're supposed to do.
So, legislating. You mean to tell me you're not supposed to legislate from the bench?
Far be it from me.
Make sure you're subscribed to Valiant Renegade and join us every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show.